Welcome to the JACC Edge podcast, where we take a hot topic in cardiology and break it down in an innovative and engaging way. Today, we're really lucky to have our illustrious guest, Dr. Martha Gulati. Dr. Gulati, can you say a few words about yourself? Give us a one-liner.
Sure. My name is Dr. Martha Gulati. I'm a cardiologist at Cedars-Sinai Heart Institute. And outside of being a cardiologist, I love to garden. Nobody will be surprised by that, but I love to garden vegetables and roses, and I love going hiking with my two dogs.
Dr. Gulati, you were telling me right before we started that you also walk to work, which is incredible for somebody being in LA.
Yeah, we are a zero-car family to reduce our carbon footprint. Some of you might know that I write about how pollution affects the heart and how it should be our job to address the environment. So we gave up our car to be part of the solution, but that means now I walk 3 miles to work and 3 miles home.
That's incredible, and really setting a standard for all of us to live up to in many fronts. And I think one of those fronts is something that's very passionate to you in your current role about diversity and inclusion. And I really want to dive into that a little bit today. So one of the studies that, or maybe you can just start out by telling us some of the work that you've done in diversity and inclusion, kind of what that means to you on a professional level, especially at the status that you currently hold.
Yeah, so I think, diversity and inclusion and belonging in our societies, in our community matters. And for cardiology, this has been an issue that has been near and dear to my heart, specifically about women in cardiology, but it applies to more than women in cardiology. Anything I say to you about women, we could replace people from underrepresented groups in our community that are also not often seen within our community. So the work that we've done is looking at women both in our society. So we've written some papers about the presidents, the leaders, the people that are seen as the lead, the lead of cardiology. We certainly know that there's less women. So if you look at presidents in our society, and we publish this work saying that, that basically if we even look at years of being a president, being a woman versus a man, we're a very small minority of the group. Now, I will say that it's getting better, and in the last decade, we've seen a change to leadership in cardiology, and I think that can only be good for us. That will help people identify when they see the leader standing up. They will be, oh, I look like them, or I am like them. Whatever their story is, wherever their background is, they're more likely to decide that this, I belong here because this person belongs here, and not only belongs, but leads. Some of the other work, though, that we've done related to diversity and equity and inclusion in cardiology has been even looking at our guidelines. So we've done some work analyzing, what percent of women are authors and co-authors of the guidelines, what percent are chairs of the guidelines. And it will be of no surprise to anyone to find, given that women are not a big part of the cardiology community, we're only 13% women cardiologists, but when you start looking at the trends of inclusion as leaders, and being seen as a leader also matters in terms of getting onto guidelines, we'll see an underrepresentation of women. And this, I think in the US, we've done much better. We've actually seen in the United States, through the AHA and ACC guidelines, we've actually seen an increase, a dramatic increase over time. But then we also looked at the Canadian Cardiovascular Society and the European Society of Cardiology, where some of the steps have not been as big in those specific communities. But there is, in terms of chairs, we definitely know there's not many women who have served as chairs of guidelines. The other finding that we found was that the same women are often being asked. And I have no problem with people being asked more than once, except that if you're always going to the same people, it means we're not getting really other people at the table, other people being, again, seen as leaders, being able to say, I'm on, I led guidelines. That's a big deal. And you can't just give those opportunities away to the same people. And I think that comes down to other people's work, which I've been part of, but some other people are also leading, looking at the inclusion of women in clinical trials. as leading the trial. So I mean, and why it matters is because when we don't have women leading clinical trials, what we know is when a woman leads a clinical trial, there's more diversity in those trials. So we'll find out more about women, but also more about people from diverse backgrounds. But right now, we have seen that women are often not running the clinical trials. They aren't leading again, and so it's not a surprise that they're not asked to be on guidelines because they're not seen as the leaders because they're not doing the trial. So it's sort of this vicious circle. Everything's interconnected, but it means for us wanting to change who we see in our community. We want to see a difference. We want people from all kinds of backgrounds here. And that means that we have to show them that it's possible, show them that they belong here, and show them that we are actively making efforts to make all parts of the cardiology community more diverse and more inclusive. And if you do that, that's how people feel they belong. No one likes to be the token, and nobody likes to not be represented. And I just actually met with a young trainee here, just as I was walking over. And they told me that they were non-binary, and they were like, where do I belong in this community? Because you've never talked, no one's really talking about me. And I said, you know what, we should write that together. Let's talk about that, because that is actually an excellent point. And I hope that that also becomes something that we change about how people are seen and how people feel here. I want people to belong here.
Absolutely. And I think it's important, like you said, on multiple fronts, both in terms of patient care, in terms of making sure we're recruiting diverse populations, but also on the flip end of that, we need diverse perspectives to bring those ideas in. And that includes making sure we have good representation from all segments of our community, whether or not they're male or female or binary or non-binary or identify in different ways. And I think that's such a critical component that's definitely being missed out upon.
Yeah, and I think that this, I think the younger generation is asking us to change what we've been doing in the past, and I welcome it. I'm like, bring it on, let's change it up. And I see changes. I mean, I truly do see changes. I think I don't want people who either read our research or listen to this and think, oh, like it's so negative. The reason we want to highlight the things that still need us to push against is we know it's changing. We know that some of it is related to the proportion of people in our community, and so when you adjust for things like that, you'll be like, oh, well, we have enough women. But we also know the feelings that we have when we see manels, for example, or meetings where there are no women seeing. And I remember filling out for the American College of Cardiology meeting, like, where are the women? We don't see the women. Where are they? And it's changed. I think every time I wrote that, now I feel like I made this change. Probably other people wrote it too, but we made this change because people were starting to listen to us. So it's not doom and gloom. We are doing better. We have allies. We have men who are supporting these changes as well. They want to see the change at the same time. And I think we also align with people who are underrepresented because as women, we know that. And that intersectionality, is important, that we unite together. Our issues may not be the same. The barriers we face will not always be the same. But if we fight such barriers together, we're more powerful.
Absolutely. And I think the data kind of supports that. There was a study that was recently published in JACC in November 2022 that you helped lead, looking at the percentage of awardees at these types of national conferences such as ACC and AHA, and what percentage of those were women or what percentage of those people were ethnically or racially diverse. And we saw, or you guys demonstrated that over the last 10 years or so, we've seen an increased proportion, although not equal. Can you talk a little bit about your findings in that work and kind of the body of work that's going on?
Yeah, you sort of summarized it already, but it is true that recognition matters. Seeing people as leaders matter in the way that we've already talked about. And awards really do matter. They are a recognition from your community that you have contributed significantly. And again, for a lot of time, we'll see the awards going to the same kind of people, which tend to be white male, or male, but we, we're when you're giving all those awards to men, you're not really, again, that idea of feeling like you belong, that your work that you've contributed is important. And I think that's changing as well. I mean, the paper will not be surprising to anyone, but I think proactively, we need to think of solutions that we can do also to address it. And there is an army of women out there that actually nominates women now for awards. We make sure that they at least have somebody to consider. We don't know if the award selection committee is going to choose our person, but if we're not there, if we're not putting people up, we have no one to blame but ourselves. You have to have an application in to get an award.
Absolutely. And I think it's great to see, at least from the trainee perspective, to see somebody who is a woman in a position of leadership then contributing to try and bring other people up. And I think, speaking to you and hearing about the work that you and your team have been doing is just really, 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 really incredible and uplifting for all of us.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's important, and we all, when we get to wherever we need to be able to be the change makers, that is our responsibility. I can't say I'm doing it alone. There's a ton of women, and there's a ton of women who've come before me who have taught me this or are leading on these changes, and men too. I will say there are he for she's out there that are also trying to make a change, and we look to them because a lot of men hold power, and they are the ones that we are turning to often to say, look, this needs to change. They agree. It's sometimes us that see it because we're seeing it through our eyes. But once we bring it to their attention, they are also more able to appreciate what's going on. And I've always found that they've been enthusiastic partners.
And I think that's also a fair point, where you need advocates on both ends. You need advocates who represent the communities we're trying to increase in terms of diversity and retention, in terms of retention, but also working with the established group of people who might be in positions of power, and really finding ways we can collaborate and overall work together as a community. So I think that's a really beautiful statement. One of the other things I wanted to kind of step back and talk about was what some of those barriers are. I know there was an article that you had contributed to regarding the effect of childbearing during cardiology training and how that might affect retention or recruitment of possible women in cardiology and other people into the cardiology fellowship. Can you talk a little bit about how do we address some of those concerns?
Yeah, it wasn't about fellowship, actually. It was actually a practicing cardiologist.
Oh, okay.
And the reason we didn't address fellows, although we're thinking of doing it now, but the reason is because as fellows you have different rules, but as attendings and in the real world, we don't know if anyone's taking care of us. And there's a lot of variable factors: where you work, private practice, hospital, university, what state you work in, because there's laws that are particular to one state that don't exist in another state. The biggest problem about childbearing, if you will, is the fact that we have no federal mandated leave.
Absolutely.
And that leaves women exposed to the risk of their state, to the risk of their hospital. What are their benefits? What does HR say about them leaving? And what we learned from that, so that we polled our women in cardiology. They had to be a practicing cardiologist. Meaning, and we asked specifically, we want to know about your childbearing experience as a cardiologist, not as a training. If you had all your kids in training, we didn't want your stories. It's not that we don't want them, but at that moment we needed really our when you were in practice, what happened. And it was so telling, and it really isn't that surprising, but we found so many women when they were pregnant, and once they told their boss that they were pregnant, they ultimately had to pay forward call. Now, what career outside of medicine makes you do stuff before you go on maternity leave at the most vulnerable time of your life? And when you're pregnant, that is a vulnerable time. Already our jobs are quite physically intensive, they're emotionally stressful. And then we're saying, you'll take more call now that you're pregnant because we know you're going to go on maternity leave. And that sort of pay for your pregnancy I think is a big problem. And that's what we saw. It was a very big problem. Also, people who were more likely to do that had more complications with their pregnancy. And our complication rates during pregnancy exceed the best data we have for surgeons, which comes from the urology group. They thought that was the highest. No, our rate of pregnancy complications is much higher.
Wow.
And so we're putting the mothers, who is a cardiologist, life at risk. We're putting the baby's life at risk. For what? To make sure they do coverage ahead of time, and you know, whether they're directly related or not, there's this association. I mean, there's obviously other things that we couldn't control for in our trial or in our survey, but it was very enlightening. You know, and we found what was most disturbing that we found was that we asked women that we had specific questions, but we asked them to also, there was an open place. They could write anything. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your experience? And what was disturbing and upsetting was the comments. And we analyzed those comments with a team of lawyers from the Hastings School of Law that in California. They actually run the work-life program, and they've actually been behind all the laws that have come out to protect women, not just related to medicine. They have actually changed things in the business world and in the working world, saying that women have rights. Women or people who are childbear have rights, and those people should be protected by certain laws. And so these great lawyers that worked with us on our paper, when they read through them, the personal stories that were shared with us, many of which we found were actually illegal.
Wow.
So things that happened to our women in cardiology were, you know, if you really wanted to go to court, I mean, nobody really does that. We just kind of put up with it and do it. And so from that paper, we came up with some solutions. Like, of course, it would be ideal to have a federally mandated law that protected women. But while we wait for that, in the meantime, we should be not allowing hospitals or universities or even private groups to demand of somebody to pay forward when they know that they're pregnant. Rather, why can't we be like other companies? If there's somebody gone, you know, let's have a temp take their place. Let's have somebody who does locums, hire them into your department or hire them into your group, and have them do, during the time that woman is gone, during her maternity leave, have someone else, so that nobody has resentment for the woman getting pregnant and that they have to do somehow more work, but also so the woman doesn't have to pay things forward. Yeah. And I think that these are solutions we need to be looking at until we have some legal protection for women. I think also from that, you know, we also found out that the women that are most dissatisfied or feel like their view related to cardiology and their career was negative, it was those who either had complications from their pregnancy or had to do these things that are really shouldn't be allowed. And I think that leads us to the next question too. It leads us to the questions of fellows, because we do need to know what's happening to fellows and how are they treated, because I'm sure it's different hospital to hospital, state to state. And I honestly believe it's a male issue too, a man's issue, because men have children too during training or as cardiologists. The younger generation wants to spend time. We should have family leave. It doesn't need to call maternity leave. It doesn't need to be called paternity leave. It's family leave. How do we make sure, how to make it natural for men to step back and say, hey, I have a newborn, I want to be there. I want to be with my wife, I want to be with my baby, I want to take care and bond at that really critical time. They're not sleeping anyway, they're probably pretty tired. we should make that, normalize that. But even to this day, at places that offer paternity leave, we know that many men don't take it because it's almost not socially acceptable. We have to change that. And I do think this younger generation will change that, but I think us asking these questions is only so that the decision makers of this world, in our cardiology world, knows what's happening to women.
Exactly.
And knows why it's a challenge for us to attract women to our field. If they see an attending going through what looks like terror to them, they're not going to choose our field. They might love cardiology, but they'll be like, whoa, what, like, is that how they treat their women? Then maybe I don't need to be there. And so we've got to change how we look in some ways, in so many ways actually, but we also have to change what we do to people during the most critical time. There should be no reason. Women always ask me, when should I get pregnant? And my answer is always, whenever you want. If it's in training, go ahead and do it. If it's when you're a young attending because you feel like, now I can afford a nanny, like, do it. Do what's best for you. But we shouldn't be talking about, oh, it's so horrible to have it when you're attending, maybe you have more protected time when you are a fellow. That should not be the reason. It's your clock, it's your time, it's when you decide to have a child. And it's so interesting that we're still having these conversations when a lot of other parts of society have moved beyond this. But I think the biggest thing in the U.S. is the lack of a federally mandated maternity leave.
Absolutely, and I do think it needs to be addressed on a federal level. But it does sometimes feel like a pregnancy within the family, whether it's the partner or whoever it might be that is pregnant, is often treated almost like a crime, like something that they have to deal with on their own without support, and that seems egregious for a institution and a group of us that are so dedicated to health, and we affect the health of our own providers.
And we're affecting the health of people at the most critical time, and also for even when they take the leave, the stories we heard, and also the survey responses, most people kept their email on. They would they might even have, if they had an out of office notice, they were still checking on patients. Some would check on email for work related stuff. Some chose to, but some never even made an out of office response and worked even when they were technically on maternity leave, which really should not happen. Additionally, when a few examples that we had, women who had taken maternity leave and were legally allowed that time, they were getting called from their boss, when are you coming back? What day should we expect you back? Or, kind of pressure to return earlier. Wow. And I think that puts an undue stress on, especially, moms, but new moms. You don't know how much help people have, because it's at an age also, usually pregnancies at a younger age. You don't always have the resources for everything. At that time, you may be like, okay, I get maternity leave and then I'll hire a nanny, or then they have to go to daycare. But everybody's situation is different. It shouldn't matter. We should be able to have that time. And I will tell you, at that time that we wrote that paper, I was the chief of cardiology. And the reason that I did this survey was actually because I had trouble hiring women. And everyone thought, oh, she's going to come in as chief and she's going to hire a bunch of women. Well, it was a challenge, and one of the biggest challenges was the state I was living in did not didn't really have any rules. Our hospital wanted to give you the minimalist amount of time, and they wanted you to use your vacation time, which I really think that's your vacation time. Like, that should just be provided on the side. That should not be, okay, you have sick leave. They're not sick. They're on maternity leave. But that's how our hospital was. And I think that I started finding that was a big barrier, because I was looking at a lot of younger women trying to make them come and join me. And they'd ask these questions, and I'd have to be honest, right? I'm not going to lie to them. They can also look it up on HR too. But one thing that I did I only had men, so I had a young faculty member whose wife got pregnant. He informed me. Then we knew when the baby would be coming, and basically when the baby came, he called me that day and said, I want to take some time off. I'm like, okay, how long? I'm like, how much do you need? I did not want to dictate, because I wanted him to tell the young women that I was trying to attract next that, even as a guy, she gave me whatever time I needed. I decided to not ask work about it. I just said, this is how I'm going to do it. The work will get done. We all covered for each other, but nobody, I wanted to normalize the man leaving so that when a woman comes, we can say, well, we did that for him. Of course we'll do it for her.
Absolutely.
I mean, and so I think that sometimes you can do these things. I always figure I would do first and apologize later if someone said, why are you letting people do this? But I found it so obstructive to hiring women. I was like, we're just never going to even the playing ground here. It is going to be a whole male cardiology faculty if I continue to do this. And it was a big frustration for me. And that's actually why I did the survey, because I don't have children. But I care that women do things on their timeline, do what they want, and take care of their health, because we are physicians. I mean, we have said we're going to protect our patients. Why are we not protecting our own community?
Absolutely. And I hope that for our listeners who hear this, they are inspired by this and, can take some messages back to their home institutions and their communities and cardiology attendings and residents and fellows, and really inspire this type of change, because it does, in my opinion, start at the grassroots level, and people such as yourself who can really inspire change, even when hospital leadership may not always be on board or may not be caught up with the current way that people are thinking.
And we created a legal framework because I told you we worked with lawyers, and those lawyers, basically, it's in our appendix, but all the legal things that you can use to argue, so that for leaders that look at this paper and say, well, how do I do that in my own institution? There is a legal framework to use and to help guide your institution. Similarly, that same legal guide could be helpful for individual women who are experiencing things that they think are illegal. They should look at that document as well. Also, my friends at the Hastings School of Law at the Work-Life Center, this is what they do, and they are also available and able to counsel. They have a hotline number that I think we have, but it's easy enough to find, that women can also be able to use when they're talking about these issues with their leadership, with their bosses, to say, look, well, this is what I'm supposed to be provided with, and here are the things that are potentially illegal that I don't want to happen when I'm pregnant. That can help at least frame, maybe they'll use different words, but help frame the conversation so that people really do look at this a little bit more closely. I think we've just allowed it to happen in medicine, and in cardiology specifically, and not questioned it. We've just it's been normal. You get pregnant, you pay your call up front in cardiology. And it just was normalized. And I've never heard of it. And I wasn't necessarily the person affected by it, but I never cared if my colleague got pregnant and I had to cover what I'm like, why would we treat a man one of our colleagues who has had a heart attack? Okay, that's fine. You go. You're going to be off for a bit. We're going to cover. There's never a question when somebody's sick, but for having a child, somehow that's an inconvenience to us.
Exactly, and I think that's something that hopefully you're driving change, and we all are learning, especially as the next generation of people who are going to be coming in, to continue pushing that forward.
Yeah.
Dr. Gulati, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate your time and you sharing your insight with us. For our listeners, this is the JACC Edge podcast. We are really excited for you to hear our episode. For more information about diversity inclusion and for the papers that Dr. Gulati was talking about, we'll have it linked in our show notes, and we hope to catch you next time on our show. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.